Let's switch gears here. How did you get into teaching?
I got into teaching because of my son. I have a little boy, his name is Michael, and he had a stroke at birth. And oftentimes people will say, well, is that because of the drugs? By the time I had my son, I had not done drugs in over 5 years. So there were no drugs in my system. I had been diagnosed with thyroid disease. So I was taking thyroid medication during my pregnancy. I do not know why he had a stroke. It has never been explained to me. And I thought it was also odd. I'd never heard of a baby having a stroke. I had always associated strokes with older people, you know, or people who have high blood pressure or some, you know, other, you know, medical issue. So my son had a stroke at birth, and he had brain damage in the left cortex part of his brain. So his right side, it affected the right side of his body. The job that I had at that time, I was waitressing as well as working at a collection agency because I divorced my husband when my son was 3 months old. So I was a single mom, and I was working at a collection agency, and I was making really good money back then. That was 7 years ago. So I was making $17.32 an hour, and that was really good money back then. That's good money now.
Oh yeah, it is. Yes.
And but I had to take my son to therapy almost every day. He had to go to the feeding clinics, and he had to go to physical therapy, occupational therapy. We had rehabilitation therapy, and of course, none of those could be convenient or maybe all done at the same day. You know, in the same building, the same appointment. So, you know, I had to leave work a lot, and he was also having seizures. And so oftentimes the daycare would call, and it was an on-site daycare facility, so I was blessed to have him there at work with me. But they would call the paramedics because, you know, he was having violent seizures. And so one day, the daycare called and said the paramedics were on their way, that, you know, he was spitting up blood, and, you know, he was really sick. And as I was getting ready to leave, my supervisor came and told me that I needed to make a decision on what was more important, because he said, you know, without a job, I wouldn't be able to take care of my son. Well, my baby was an infant, and he was more important to me than that job. And just like I found that job, I was certain I wouldn't have a problem finding another job. So I ended up leaving the collection agency, and I went across the street to the daycare, and I was talking to the owner of the daycare, you know, basically telling her, could we work something out as far as me making payments for childcare, because I was no longer going to be working at the collection agency, and just explained to her what had happened. And so she thought that I would be a great teacher. It caught me off guard. It was something I had never thought about. And, you know, she said, well, you know, Brenda, I watch you every day. You know, you're here with your baby, you're singing to him, you're reading to him, and, you know, every break that you get, you're always here in this daycare with him, spending time with him. She goes, you have that gift. And so she went and gave me a tour of the school, and I was going to have 13 students. And
is this Starshine Academy?
This was at Bright Ideas Charter School. This is before I went to Starshine. And so I went and looked at it, and so she said, well, I can only pay you $7.50 an hour, but you can have free childcare, and if you need to make extra money, you can also work at the daycare. So I took it. So I went from $17.32 an hour to $7.50 an hour with free childcare, and to supplement my income, I would work at the daycare. So, you know, I had free daycare, and my son was there. And so I started working at the charter school, and this was all new. I mean, so I went, you know, on the internet and tried to get as much information, you know, to educate myself. And by the end of the semester, I realized I was not giving these students what they deserved, because I didn't have the education, you know, to educate them. That gave me, you know, the incentive to think about going back to school. And I was looking at my son one day at the daycare, and I thought, you know, my son, you know, he might face some challenges in the future. well, the better education that I have, if I can help him, you know, be successful in addition to what his teachers are going to do,
Right.
then that will give him the best opportunity to have success. And so I thought, you know, I'm going to be his first teacher. I need to have an education. So I went and enrolled in community college, and I worked at the charter school, and then I would work at the daycare. I'd leave the daycare and I'd go to school, and I went to school Monday through Thursday, and then on the weekends I waited tables, and I did this for almost 4 years.
4 years. And you got your master's in 2007.
I got my bachelor's in 2006 in human services from the University of Phoenix, and then in 2007, 1 year later,
Wow,
I
woman.
got my master's
That's
in special
incredible.
education from Grand Canyon University.
God speaks.